I've always believed that trust is the foundation of a marriage, the invisible thread that holds two people together through the chaos of life. For 16 years, I thought that thread between me and Clara was unbreakable. We'd built a life together in our modest but cozy home in Asheville, North Carolina, a place where the mountains seemed to cradle our dreams, where our two kids, Ethan and Lily, grew up chasing fireflies in the backyard. I'm Jacob, a high school history teacher, not the most glamorous job, but it gave me purpose, shaping young minds. Clara, my wife, was the creative one, a freelance graphic designer whose vibrant energy lit up every room. She was the kind of woman who could make a stranger feel like an old friend in minutes. I loved her for that. I loved her for everything. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had our routines, mornings spent sipping coffee on the porch, evenings juggling the kids' soccer practices and art classes, and late nights when we'd collapse on the couch, her head on my shoulder, laughing at some silly show. We were partners, or so I thought. The signs were there, I suppose, but I was too busy living our life to notice them. Looking back, it's like trying to piece together a puzzle you didn't know was missing pieces until the picture was already falling apart. It started subtly, the way betrayals often do. Clara had always been glued to her phone. Her work demanded it, with clients constantly emailing about logos or branding projects. But around 6 months ago, I noticed a shift. She'd angle her screen away from me when she typed, her fingers dancing with a kind of urgency I hadn't seen before. She'd smile at her phone in a way that wasn't about work, a private, almost secretive curve of her lips. I'd ask, "What's so funny?" And she'd shrug, saying, "Just a meme from a friend." I didn't push. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was Clara, my Clara, the woman who'd cried in my arms when we lost our first pregnancy, who'd danced with me in the kitchen to old jazz records when the kids were asleep. But the late nights grew more frequent. She'd stay up working, or so she said, her laptop glowing in the dark of our home office while I went to bed alone. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to an empty space beside me, the sheets cold. I'd find her typing furiously, her face illuminated by the screen, and when I'd ask if she was coming to bed, she'd snap, "In a minute, Jacob, I'm in the middle of something." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was sharp, like she was guarding something. I chalked it up to stress. Her biggest client, a local brewery, had been demanding revisions on a major campaign. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. Then there were the outings. Clara had always been social, the one dragging me to art gallery openings or community events. But now her girls' nights stretched longer, and she'd come home with a flush in her cheeks, her eyes a little too bright, her laughter a little too loud. She'd smell faintly of whiskey and something else, cologne maybe, but not mine. I'd ask, "How was it?" And she'd wave a hand, saying, "Oh, just catching up with the girls." But her friends, when I saw them at the grocery store or a school event, seemed oddly distant, their smiles tight, like they were holding back a secret I wasn't privy to. I'm not proud to admit it, but I started paying attention. Not snooping, not yet, but noticing. The way she'd leave her phone face down on the counter, something she'd never done before. The way she'd change the subject when I asked about her day, steering the conversation to the kids or my lesson plans. The way she stopped touching me. Not in an obvious way, but the small gestures were gone. No more brushing her hand against mine when we passed in the kitchen. No more leaning into me during movie nights. It was like she was pulling away inch by inch, and I was too afraid to call it what it was. The first real crack came on a Tuesday in April. I'd come home early from school. My last period was a planning block, and I'd finished grading papers faster than usual. The house was quiet, the kids at after-school activities. I expected to find Clara at her desk, but the office was empty, her laptop closed. Odd, since she'd texted me that morning saying she had a tight deadline. I wandered upstairs, thinking maybe she was napping, but our bedroom was empty too. Her car was in the driveway, so she hadn't gone far. I called her name, my voice echoing in the stillness. No answer. Then I heard it, a faint buzz from the guest room. Her phone, vibrating on the nightstand. I don't know why I went in. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the weight of all those little doubts piling up. The screen lit up with a text notification, and before I could stop myself, I looked. The name was Evan Brewery. The message preview read, "Miss you already. Same time Thursday." My stomach dropped, a cold, heavy stone settling in my gut. Evan was the marketing director at the brewery, a guy I'd met a handful of times at Clara's work events. Mid-30s, charming in that polished corporate way, with a handshake too firm and a smile too wide. I'd never liked him, but I'd never thought much of it. Just a gut feeling. Now that feeling was screaming. I didn't touch her phone. Couldn't. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I'd been punched. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe "Miss You" was just friendly, and "Same Time Thursday" was about a meeting. But the secrecy, the late nights, the distance, it all clicked into place like a lock I hadn't wanted to open. I heard the front door open downstairs, Clara's voice calling out, "Jacob, you home early?" Her tone was casual, but there was an edge to it, like she was startled. I didn't answer right away. I walked downstairs, my heart pounding, and found her in the kitchen, unpacking groceries like nothing was wrong. She looked up, her hazel eyes catching the light, and for a moment, I wanted to believe I'd misread everything. "Hey," she said, smiling. "You're home early. Everything okay?" I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded and said, "Yeah, just finished early. You?" She launched into a story about a client call, her voice bright and practiced, but I barely heard her. My mind was on that text, on Evan, on the life I thought we had. I went through the motions that night. Dinner with the kids, helping Ethan with his math homework, reading Lily a bedtime story, but I was somewhere else, spiraling. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own marriage. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. I noticed Clara's patterns more closely. She'd leave the house every Thursday afternoon, saying she was meeting a client or running errands, but she'd be gone for hours, coming back with that same flushed look. I checked our bank statements, discreetly on my laptop while she was in the shower, and found charges at a coffee shop downtown, a place she'd never mentioned, always on Thursdays. I even drove by the brewery one evening, telling myself I was just picking up takeout nearby, but really, I was looking for her car. It wasn't there, but Evan's sleek black Audi was parked in the lot, gleaming under the streetlights. The confirmation came a week later. I'd taken a half day to chaperone a field trip, but it was canceled last minute due to rain. I came home to find Clara's car gone. Even though she'd said she'd be working from home all day, something snapped in me. I opened her laptop, her password was still the same, our anniversary, and checked her email. Nothing obvious, just work stuff. Then I opened her calendar, and there it was, a recurring event labeled, "Meeting every Thursday at 2 p.m., at an address I didn't recognize. A quick search showed it was a boutique hotel downtown, the kind of place that prided itself on discretion. I felt sick, but I had to know. That Thursday, I left school early, claiming a stomach bug, and drove to the hotel. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. At 2:15, Clara's car pulled into the lot. She stepped out, her hair loose, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, one she used to wear when we went dancing. My heart twisted. Then Evan's Audi pulled in beside her. They didn't touch, didn't even look at each other as they walked inside, but their steps were in sync, like they'd done this 100 times. I sat there for an hour, staring at the hotel entrance, my mind a storm of rage and grief. I wanted to storm in, to catch them, to scream, but I didn't. I drove home, numb, and waited for her to come back. When she did, at 5 p.m., she kissed my cheek and said she'd had a productive meeting. I nodded, my face a mask, and said, "Good." Inside, I was breaking. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, was living a secret life. I didn't know how long it had been going on, but it didn't matter. The trust was gone, shattered like glass. I didn't want to confront her yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I wanted her to know that I knew, and I wanted her to hurt as much as I did. Revenge wasn't a word I'd ever thought I'd use, but it was burning in me now, a cold, sharp flame. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew it would be deliberate, calculated, and devastating. Clara had betrayed me, and I would make sure she paid for it. The days after I saw Clara and Evan at the hotel were a blur of quiet rage and calculated restraint. I went through the motions of our life, cooking breakfast for Ethan and Lily, grading papers, nodding along to Clara's stories about her day. But inside, I was a stranger in my own skin. Every smile I gave her was a lie, every touch a performance. I wasn't just hurt. I was consumed by a need to reclaim something, to make her feel the betrayal she'd inflicted on me. But I wasn't going to scream or throw things. That wasn't me. I wanted my revenge to be precise like a blade, cutting deep where she'd least expect it. I wanted her to lose something she valued, something that defined her, just as she'd taken my trust and shattered it. The first step was understanding the full scope of her deception. I needed to know how deep this went, how long she'd been meeting Evan, and whether it was just him or if there were others. I hated myself for thinking that way, but once the trust was gone, every possibility felt plausible. I started small, careful not to tip her off. Clara was smart. She'd notice if I suddenly got too curious or changed my behavior too drastically. So I kept my routine intact, but I became a shadow in our home, watching, listening, gathering pieces of the puzzle. I began by accessing her phone when she was in the shower. She'd changed her passcode, which was another stab to the gut, but I figured it out after a few tries. Lily's birthday, of all things. Her messages with Evan were locked behind an app with an extra layer of security, but I found enough in her regular texts to confirm my fears. There were vague, flirty exchanges with him, disguised as work-related banter, and a few deleted threads I could only see traces of in her notifications. I didn't have the stomach to dig deeper yet, but I took screenshots and emailed them to myself, hiding them in a folder labeled Lesson Plans. I also checked her email again, finding a confirmation for a weekend work retreat in 2 weeks at a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The brewery's name was attached, but the details were suspiciously sparse. No itinerary, no group email chain, just a private booking for 2. I knew I couldn't confront her with half the story. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't explain away. So I took a step I never thought I'd take. I bought a small tracking device, the kind people use for lost keys or luggage, and slipped it into the lining of her purse. It wasn't about following her every move. I just needed to know where she went on Thursdays, to confirm the pattern. The app showed her at the same hotel every week, always between 2 and 5 p.m., like clockwork. Once I drove by and saw Evan's car again, parked in the same spot. It was all I needed to know the affair wasn't a one-off. It was a routine, a ritual they'd built together. The betrayal wasn't just about her and Evan. It was the life she was stealing from me, from our kids. Ethan, at 14, was starting to notice the tension, asking why Mom was always gone. Lily, only 8, still clung to Clara like she was the sun. But I could see the confusion in her eyes when Clara brushed her off to take a call or leave for another meeting. I wanted to protect them, to shield them from the truth, but I also wanted Clara to face what she'd done. Not just to me, but to them. That's when the idea for my revenge started to take shape. It wasn't enough to expose her. I wanted her to lose the parts of her life she cared about most. Her reputation, her career, her social circle. I wanted her to feel the isolation I felt every time she lied to my face. I started by mapping out her world. Clara thrived on her connections, her clients, her friends, the creative community in Asheville that adored her. She was the one who organized art shows, who networked with local businesses, who made people feel seen. That was her power, and I knew that's where I'd hit her. But I had to be careful. Asheville was small and gossip spread fast. If I was going to unravel her life, it had to be subtle, surgical, and impossible to trace back to me. My first move was to plant seeds of doubt among her friends. I didn't lie outright, that wasn't my style, but I started asking questions, casual and innocent. At a school fundraiser, I chatted with Sarah, one of Clara's closest friends, and mentioned how Clara had been so busy with work lately, always at the brewery or some hotel for meetings. I watched Sarah's face tighten, her smile faltering. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was processing it. I did the same with others in her circle, dropping hints about her long hours, her new projects with Evan, always framing it as concern rather than accusation. I just hope she's not overworking herself, I'd say, letting their imaginations fill in the blanks. Next, I turned to her professional life. The brewery was her biggest client, and Evan was her main point of contact. I couldn't touch him directly, he was too insulated, too slick, but I could make things uncomfortable. I created an anonymous email account and sent a vague tip to the brewery's HR department, suggesting they look into inappropriate conduct between their marketing director and a contractor. I didn't name Clara, but I mentioned the hotel, the Thursday meetings, and enough details to raise eyebrows. I knew it wouldn't lead to anything concrete. HR investigations like that often fizzle out, but it would put pressure on Evan, maybe make him sloppy. And if Clara caught wind of it, she'd start to feel the walls closing in. The real plan, though, was the Ret-Eat. I knew it was their next big rendezvous, a weekend away where they could pretend they were something more than a dirty secret. The cabin was remote, tucked away in the mountains, perfect for their little escape. But it was also perfect for what I had in mind. I spent hours researching the place online, pulling up photos, reviews, even the layout from a real estate listing. It was isolated, with only one road in and out, surrounded by dense forest. I didn't want to hurt anyone. That wasn't who I was. But I wanted them to feel exposed, vulnerable, like their world could collapse at any moment. I decided to use technology to my advantage. I bought a small, high-quality camera, the kind hikers use for wildlife shots, and drove up to the cabin a week before their trip. I hiked the property under the guise of birdwatching, planting the camera in a tree with a clear view of the cabin's front porch and driveway. It was motion-activated, with a live feed I could access from my phone. I tested it, making sure it captured everything clearly. My plan wasn't to catch them in the act. That was too crude. I wanted evidence of their time together, something I could use later, something that would make Clara squirm when she realized how much I knew. But the heart of my revenge was something bigger, something that would hit Clara where it hurt most: her public image. She was proud of her role in the community, her reputation as a creative, dependable professional. I started working on a way to dismantle that. I created a fake social media profile, not on the big platforms, but on a local Asheville arts forum where Clara was active. The profile was for a freelancer named Anna, someone who could blend into the community without raising suspicion. I posted subtle comments on threads Clara was part of, questioning the ethics of designers who got too close to clients, hinting at conflicts of interest. I never named her, but I knew she'd see the posts, and I knew she'd wonder if they were about her. I also reached out to a few of her smaller clients, posing as a concerned colleague from another agency. I didn't say anything outright damning, just planted doubts, asking if they'd noticed delays in her work, or if they'd heard about her overcommitting to certain projects. One client, a local bookstore owner, emailed Clara directly, copying me on the thread by mistake. I saw her response, flustered and overly apologetic, promising to prioritize their project. It was working. She was starting to feel the pressure, even if she didn't know where it was coming from. At home, I kept up the facade of the oblivious husband. I cooked her favorite meals, asked about her day, even suggested we plan a family trip to distract her from her guilt. But I could see the cracks in her too. She was jumpier, checking her phone more often, snapping at the kids over small things. Once, I caught her staring at me across the dinner table, her eyes searching, like she was trying to figure out if I knew. I just smiled and passed her the mashed potatoes. The weekend of the retreat was approaching, and I was ready. I told Clara I was taking the kids to visit my parents in Charlotte, a plausible excuse that got me out of the house. In reality, I was staying in a cheap motel nearby, monitoring the camera feed and finalizing the last piece of my plan. I'd hired a private investigator, not to follow Clara, but to dig into Evan. I wanted dirt, anything I could use to make him squirm too. The investigator came back with gold. Evan was married, with a kid on the way, and his wife had no idea about Clara. That was my leverage. I drafted an anonymous letter to his wife, laying out just enough to make her question him. Dates, times, the hotel. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to wait until the retreat, until I had footage from the cabin to back it up. As I packed the kids' bags for the fake Charlotte trip, Clara kissed me goodbye, her lips brushing my cheek with a warmth that felt like a mockery. "Have fun," she said, her voice light but strained. I nodded, my face calm, but inside, I was counting down the hours. She thought she was getting away with it. She thought she was safe. But I was about to turn her world upside down, and she'd never see it coming. The weekend of Clara's retreat arrived, and I felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to leap. The kids were with my parents in Charlotte for real this time. I'd driven them down the day before, making small talk with my mom about summer plans while my mind churned with what was coming. I'd returned to Asheville under the cover of night, checking into a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. My laptop was open on the wobbly desk, the live feed from the cabin's camera flickering in the dim light. I hadn't slept properly in days, but adrenaline kept me sharp. Every move I'd made over the past weeks had led to this moment, and I wasn't going to falter now. The camera feed showed the cabin's front porch, quiet and empty under the midday sun. The Blue Ridge Mountains loomed in the background, their beauty a cruel contrast to the ugliness I was about to unleash. I'd spent the morning reviewing my plan, checking every detail like a general before a battle. The anonymous letter to Evan's wife was ready, saved as a draft in my fake email account, with dates and times from the hotel and now the cabin. The private investigator had sent me more. Evan's financial records showed cash withdrawals every Thursday, likely to cover hotel bills without leaving a paper trail. I had screenshots from Clara's phone, calendar entries, and now the camera feed. It was a net, and I was ready to pull it tight. At 1:47 p.m., Clara's car pulled into the cabin's driveway. My heart thudded as I watched her step out, her hair catching the sunlight, a weekend bag slung over her shoulder. She wore sunglasses and a light jacket, looking like she was on a casual getaway, not a clandestine affair. Moments later, Evan's Audi rolled in beside her. He got out, all confidence, his tailored shirt and easy grin making my stomach turn. They didn't touch, not yet, but there was a familiarity in how they moved toward the cabin, like they'd done this dance before. The camera caught it all. Their glances, the way Clara's hand brushed his arm as they entered the cabin. I saved the footage, time-stamped, and added it to my growing file. I didn't need to see more. I knew what they were doing inside, and the thought made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay focused. This wasn't about catching them in the act. It was about dismantling their world. I opened my laptop and sent the letter to Evan's wife, attaching a still from the camera feed. A clear shot of him and Clara walking into the cabin together. The message was short, clinical. "You deserve to know. Your husband has been meeting this woman every Thursday at the Hotel Indigo, and now at this cabin. Check his phone. Check his withdrawals." I used a VPN to mask my location, sent it, and deleted the account. The seed was planted. Next, I turned to Clara's world. The Asheville Arts Forum was buzzing with weekend chatter, and Anna, my fake persona, was ready to strike. I posted a thread titled "Ethics in Freelance Design," posing as a concerned newcomer. I wrote about a hypothetical designer who blurred lines with a client, spending hours in private meetings that seemed more personal than professional. I mentioned the brewery by name, not Clara, but anyone who knew her would make the connection. I'd seeded enough doubt over the weeks that this post would feel like confirmation. Within hours, comments piled up, some dismissive, others curious, a few outright suspicious. One user, a friend of Clara's, asked pointedly, "Is this about someone specific?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The gossip would do the rest. I wasn't done. Clara's biggest client, the brewery, was hosting a launch event for their new campaign the following week, an event she'd designed. I'd learned from my investigator that the brewery's owner, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret, valued transparency and hated drama. I sent another anonymous email, this time to Margaret, with a carefully worded tip. "You might want to review your contractor's conduct. She's been using company time for personal meetings with your marketing director at the Hotel Indigo." I attached a screenshot of Clara's calendar, the recurring meeting at the hotel's address. I knew Margaret wouldn't fire Clara outright. Freelancers were too valuable, but she'd question her, maybe pull back on future contracts. Clara's reputation would take the hit. By Sunday morning, the camera feed showed Clara and Evan leaving the cabin. They looked relaxed, laughing as they loaded their bags, oblivious to the storm I'd set in motion. I drove back to Asheville, my hands steady on the wheel, and picked up the kids from Charlotte that evening. Clara was home when we arrived, her face bright with a fake smile as she hugged Ethan and Lily. "How was your weekend?" she asked, her voice too cheerful. I shrugged, said, "Fine," and watched her closely. She didn't suspect a thing, but I could see the strain in her eyes, like she was carrying a weight she couldn't share. The fallout began Monday. I got a call from Sarah, Clara's friend, who sounded shaken. "Jacob, is everything okay with you and Clara?" she asked. I played dumb, saying, "Why, what's up?" She hesitated, then mentioned the forum post, saying people were talking about Clara and someone at the brewery. I acted surprised, concerned, and hung up, knowing the rumors were spreading. That evening, Clara came home late, her face pale. She didn't say much, just mumbled about a tough day and went to bed early. I checked her phone later. She'd turned off notifications, but I saw a flurry of texts from Evan, urgent and clipped, "We need to talk. Now." I smiled to myself. The net was tightening. Tuesday brought the real blow. Clara got a call from Margaret during dinner. I watched her face as she stepped into the office, closing the door. I couldn't hear the conversation, but when she came out, her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice neutral. She nodded, but her voice cracked as she said, "Just some client stuff." I knew better. Margaret had likely confronted her about the email, maybe even mentioned the hotel. Clara was unraveling, and I hadn't even played my final card. That night, I sat her down. The kids were asleep, the house quiet. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 16 years, and felt a strange calm. "Clara," I said, "I know about Evan." Her face froze, her lips parting but no sound coming out. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts, the hotel, the Thursdays, the cabin. I showed her a still from the camera feed on my phone, her and Evan laughing on the porch. She stared at it, her breath shallow, and then she broke, tears streaming down her face. "Jacob, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I let her talk, let her spill her excuses. How it started as a work flirtation, how she felt trapped, how she never meant to hurt me. I listened, my face blank, and when she was done, I said, "I'm not deciding anything yet, but you need to know what this has done to us." I didn't tell her about the emails, the forum, the letter to Evan's wife. I didn't need to. The damage was done. Over the next week, her world collapsed. The brewery canceled her contract, citing concerns about professionalism. Her friends grew distant, their group chats quieter, their invitations fewer. Evan stopped texting. His wife had confronted him, I later learned, and he was scrambling to save his own marriage. Clara was a ghost in our home, her confidence gone, her spark dimmed. She tried to apologize again, begging me to forgive her, but I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. I moved out temporarily, taking a small apartment near the school. The kids stayed with me half the time, and I shielded them from the truth, saying Mom and I needed space to figure things out. But Clara knew the cost of her betrayal. She'd lost her reputation, her clients, her friends. She'd lost the life she'd built, piece by piece, just as I'd planned. I didn't feel triumph, though, just a hollow satisfaction. Revenge had been my goal, and I'd achieved it, but it didn't fill the hole she'd left in me. As I sit in my apartment now, grading papers in the quiet, I wonder what comes next. Clara's still in our house, still trying to reach me, but I'm not sure if I can rebuild what she broke. The kids need us, and that's the only thing keeping me tethered to her. Maybe one day we'll talk, really talk, but for now I've done what I set out to do. She betrayed me and I made her pay. The question is whether the price was worth it for either of us.